To me, a privacy threat is completely different from a cybersecurity or hacking threat. They need to be handled differently as well. The privacy threat is about the massive collection of data. At the state level, this massive collection is called mass surveillance and has been going on for a long time, way before big tech, way before it was revealed by Snowden. When 9/11 happened, this triggered justification for an expansion of data collection at the state level. But around the same time, tech companies started to grow and began to use the surveillance economy model. Collect your data and then make money from your data. The large volume of data mining off your personal data is one of the biggest threats that I try to save you from. The phone is the primary vector of collection of all your personal data, from location to behavior. Your phone has it. But a different threat also exists on your phone, and it is a hacking threat. What is different in hacking is that it is a personalized threat. It is not tied to big tech, and it is focused on target individuals. In other words, the problem I want to discuss today, the cybersecurity threat, is the extra computer on your phone called the baseband modem processor. This, my friends, is a risk on all phones. There is no phone operating system that can save you, and the risk is higher with standard Android phones and iPhones. That is what we will investigate today, so stay right there. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com, and I'm now one of the top creators on there. In case I get the platform, please follow me there using the link in the description. And also join me on my app BraxMe, which is a privacy-focused social media. My company offers protective tools like a VPN, BraxMail, and now we have officially begun shipping the Brax 2 privacy phone, which is a phone that does not reveal your identity. If you're interested in keeping your identity and information private, these products are on my app, BraxMe. The link is in the description. This video will contain a lot of detail. I think it is important for me to not just generalize, but give you specific names and industry labels so you can independently research what I say. The way to explain the problem with the phone is to give you full information on how a phone is built and its constituent parts. A phone motherboard, or its computing guts, is just a single circuit board, and it is quite small. This motherboard is called an SoC, or system on a chip, although this is a misnomer since they are systems on a chip in reality, plural. And in fact, an SoC can have another embedded SoC. This is very complicated, and this leads to even more security problems because many layers builds areas of mistakes which hackers can attack. This is called having a large attack footprint. And hackers have been able to break into phones and insert files in the user space, so this is a deadly threat. And most of you have already seen the first phases of this with the Pegasus attack. The smarts of a smartphone is controlled by the application processor, or AP, and this is what you are familiar with since this is what runs the user interface. This is typically Android or iOS, although there are other OSs like KaiOS and even Linux. The next important part of the smartphone is the other computer, which is the baseband modem processor, or MP. This is the computer that communicates with the cell carrier and makes the device a phone. So basically, a phone has two major CPUs running, the AP and the MP, or again, the application processor and the modem processor. I'm just going to say AP and MP in the rest of this video, so I hope you don't get confused. When someone like Apple says iOS is secure, or when some phone OS maker claims their OS is secure, you cannot believe them. The reason is that the phone OS has control only of the application processor. The modem processor is an independent device, and it has its own threat footprint and attack vectors. It is basically a black box that the application processor does not control. Here's the other interesting part. Though the AP and the MP are independent CPUs, the AP and MP share the same memory space, or RAM, of the device, and this has already proven to be hackable. Also, the AP needs to send its data to the MP so it can go to the cell carrier, so they are by no means separate, they are directly connected in reality. A phone motherboard is an SoC. Apple, Qualcomm, Google, Samsung, MediaTek, Broadcom, and so on have many patents relating to a smartphone, but most of the patents for the baseband modem are owned by Qualcomm and MediaTek. Qualcomm is the undisputed leader that sells most high-end smartphone SoCs. Apple makes its own SoCs or motherboard and makes its own AP and then uses Qualcomm to supply the baseband capability or MP. Qualcomm itself powers most Pixels, Motorola's, and many high-end phones with the Snapdragon SoC. This should be familiar to many since that covers most of the US phones aside from Apple. Samsung uses some Snapdragon SoCs but also started making their own SoC with their own AP and MP using the Exynos label, and this was codenamed Shannon. Likely they licensed the MP patents from Qualcomm. MediaTek makes their own SoC with their own AP and MP. Typically, you would see the brand MediaTek Helio as the current name for the SoC. I don't know much about Huawei, but it may also be making their own SoCs with AP and MP. But again, where the SoC maker does not have the parts for the MP, they can source those from Qualcomm or MediaTek. I don't believe Huawei has access to Qualcomm, so I'm going to guess that their source is MediaTek. I gave you this big picture here to show you the complexity in preserving security. Once each player makes their own SoC and changes the modem processor, then each one can open up their own security holes. And if Huawei in fact makes their own SoC, then this means that the Chinese government could in theory then embed supply chain hacks in both the AP and the MP on those phones. And this is on top of the other threats which we are already receiving on the more standardized components. The CPUs on the baseband modems are not even standardized. On MediaTek, this is based on the ARM architecture, which is the same as the AP, but Qualcomm uses its own chip architecture called Hexagon, which they believe is more secure. Beyond the MP chip, let's now look at the operating systems. The MPs use a different kind of operating system called RTOS, or Real-Time Operating System. These are low overhead, faster response embedded OS, usually smaller. And each MP maker may use several different RTOS, like Qualcomm. In embedded systems, Linux is considered to be too slow, so a real-time operating system is used. However, there's no single maker of RTOS. There are many players that make an RTOS, including Microsoft. Just think here, multiple OS options, multiple chances of bugs that perhaps would never be found until a hacker finds it. I hope you're slowly getting the picture of complexity here. There are different software, different chip architectures, different implementations in SoCs, and we're not even at the level of the differences in cell protocols like 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. Now let's talk about the SIM card. Circuitry was also added to the SIM card, which is a smart card. It has memory and apparently logic functions. This obviously interfaces with the MP, but I'm not quite clear on how the SIM is controlled by the MP beyond power and reading the subscriber and cell network data. The SIM card, which is the subscriber identity module, contains the identifier called IMSI, or International Mobile Subscriber Identity, that identifies your account with the carrier. The SIM card for LTE also contains a security code called KI, which is like an LTE security key. When you connect to the carrier, the KI is used to generate hashes that are compared instead of the IMSI. The KI is hidden in the SIM card. The idea in theory is for the IMSI to not be transmitted over the radio in ordinary use, although you can trick the phone to send the actual IMSI, which is of course targeted by the IMSI catching devices we will talk about later. So think of the KI as a password and only the password hash is sent, never the actual password. But here's an interesting detail. Some SIM cards for the smartphones, depending on the carrier, includes an application module. There's also a built-in browser, for example, which allows remote control of the phone via the SIM. The main one initially discovered was called the SAT browser. This was the one hacked in the infamous Simjacker attack. But it gets worse. Apparently, another browser code can be in the SIM card, and this one is called WIB browser, and this was also successfully hacked, though it did not get as much publicity. So there are 2 known attacks using flaws in the SIM card portion alone. The next problem is something I already mentioned, and that is the fact that the MP and the AP share the same main memory area or RAM of the device. Security researchers have assured me in the past that this is bulletproof, since the shared memory can only be accessed via a memory manager that guarantees locking of the memory, so the MP and the AP supposedly cannot gain access without control of the other. Again, this is a sign of wishful thinking, since this is of course an area that can be used as a backdoor into the user content of the device from the modem end. If there are secret backdoors through here, we will not know it. Though if there is, it is likely not going to be on every model, since there are many SoCs. The biggest players will be Apple and Qualcomm, so they will be the best to target for backdoors between the AP and the MP. Now, to prove there is a problem here, someone has already done a buffer overflow hack on the memory via the baseband modem or the MP and got root access to the phone and was able to dump a file on the phone. I believe this hack was on a Samsung Exynos device, or Shannon. Now let's go further in. Beyond the SIM card, the cell communications use a well-known command set called the Hayes AT commands, which I remember using in the 80s on Hayes modems. This is also another attack vector on the phones. There are other vendor-specific commands that can be used on the MP, again opening up the possibility of secret commands that can be sent via the cell network. When you think of attacking the baseband, normally the target is the interception of text messages, calls, and initiating either from a remote access point. However, if there's a backdoor in the memory area or a hack from a buffer overflow, then what other access can be acquired by a remote hacker? Obviously, the fear is direct access to the user space on the device. There are many more steps involved here, but definitely hackers have already gathered that there are multiple vulnerabilities here, so expect more hacks to follow. The question is if the vulnerabilities are just tied to software flaws, or are there intentional backdoors? Now, the way some hackers have reverse engineered the behavior of the MP is by examining the image of the firmware. In Android phones, this is in the OEM area of the phone and is often called modem.bin. So not everything about the phone can be hidden if it is in this binary file. So hackers are not attacking blind. We may not be able to see what's embedded in the SoC, but hackers can see some behavior in firmware contained in modem.bin. Also, if modem.bin ever gets updated, then it may be possible to compare 2 different versions to see what has changed. Let's understand the data flow from the AP to the MP. The MP manages multiple communications channels. First, the cell voice goes through the carrier channel called SS7. SS7 is the carrier's main way of controlling voice and text traffic, and the main component of this is addressability and signaling, meaning SS7 is responsible for routing text and phone calls within the carrier network, what we knew on the phone networks as packet switching. SS7 itself, though, is managed by the phone carriers, and this is a worldwide network. Anyone with privileges can access SS7 and intercept phone calls and texting, and even trigger independent texting and calling using a designated phone number without the actual device being involved. So SS7 can be hacked within the carrier SS7 network itself and by insiders. This is outside of the phone but needs to be mentioned since it is still a threat. I'm certain governments can gain access to SS7. In fact, access is required by the CALEA law in the United States, Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. The other part of the MP function is to create an internet data channel. The significance of this is that the data channel receives its data from the AP. When the cell data is enabled, this is where the internet traffic is directed. This is routed by the carrier from the data channel to the internet and is separate from the SS7 network. Now, interestingly, when the phone uses Wi-Fi and connects to a separate network, then the traffic does not pass through the MP, and it is between the AP and the Wi-Fi hardware, which is on the AP side. So when you use Wi-Fi, you bypass the MP. Think about this well, because obviously this has security implications. The MP is in charge of negotiating how the data and SS7 channels are sent over the radio. This is where the radio signals are controlled by the module called DSP, or Digital Signal Processor. This portion of the MP converts the data to a radio signal and establishes a connection with the cell towers. This side is all radio-based. This, as we already know, is hacked by the government using the Stingray or the various other sea creature names for newer versions. This hacking by the government occurs at the radio level. One of the known tricks in the past has been to downgrade an LTE connection to 3G. This can then be used to eliminate the encryption in LTE. However, now that there is no 3G anymore, these devices have unknown tricks to capture the radio through a Stingray type device or IMSI capture natively on LTE. I can only assume that this is done through some backdoor gathered through inside information, or perhaps a backdoor required by the CALEA law. Outside of known use by government, obviously such a method may be discovered by hackers, just like the hacks were discovered on 3G and 2G. There are already many flaws discovered in establishing connections between the phone and the tower, including the ability to downgrade a connection and obtain the IMSI. What happens if you remove the SIM card? The MP controls the SIM card. The SIM card in itself is the subscriber identity, as I indicated earlier. It uses the KI value to validate itself to the network. If you do not have a SIM card, there is no way to confirm an identity, and there is no KI to send to the LTE carrier. Also, without a SIM card, it is not entirely clear to the phone who your phone carrier is, because the SIM card also contains network information. I'm going to guess that the emergency or 911 calling feature randomly picks the strongest tower that's compatible and uses that for 911 calling. In any case, 911 calling itself is an outgoing function, meaning no one is contacting the phone directly, and specifically if there is no SIM card. Thus, it is my belief that removing the SIM card removes the ability of the phone to be addressed individually, either by an SS7 attack, an attack on the SIM card's SAT browser or web browser. There would be no phone number. It would also, in my estimation, prevent the sending of AT commands to the modem or other custom vendor instructions, since some sort of addressing would be needed and that would be absent. The phone, when not connected to a specific carrier via SIM card, no longer checks in regularly like a regular LTE phone. This is the behavior of a standard phone. It reports regularly to the closest tower, and this is needed to check for incoming calls and texts, and nowadays to maintain an internet connection. So my conclusion is that removing the SIM card cuts off the baseband MP from external control. Remember this point when you're at a protest or entering an area that could geofence you. Geofencing is when someone finds all the individuals in a certain location via tracking of phones. Something else to note, it was published somewhere that a 3-letter agency got a hold of the KI codes at Gemalto, the biggest maker of SIM cards. This means that some SIM cards can be duplicated by 3-letter agencies, which allow them to intercept the traffic directly. This list was discovered as hacked. I wonder what was not discovered, or if it's ongoing. Unfortunately, on regular Android and iOS phones, there is no method to disconnect or depower the baseband modem. So the only realistic solution is to remove the SIM card. This is the reason I dislike eSIMs in a big way, because I'm not sure an eSIM can be entirely disconnected like the physical way that a physical SIM can. The important point in explaining this massive landscape of the baseband modem is to first show the competitive situation and how things are actually built. Some people are under the impression that you can just customize your own phone, take out the Wi-Fi, remove Bluetooth, or just move this connector to the antenna, and suddenly you have a safe phone. Let's just use the information I just gave you to analyze this. The miniaturization in the phone world is in the nanometers. We have phone chips made as small as 12 nanometers in production. So if you think you can just use a soldering gun and you can disconnect things, you better open up your phone and see if you can do this. I assure you it is definitely out of my league. It is not possible to even distinguish how power is supplied to the SoC, since there's usually now a separate power management chip. We're not talking about direct wiring now. The power management chip can supply or withhold power based on the chip logic. This is how the phone can be partially on when the power is off. For example, the SoC power management chip keeps the Bluetooth BLE module active on an iPhone so it can ping a signal like an AirTag when the phone is off. An MP is also operating in standby mode for the cell radio, so there's always power going to it. And again, not in some easily recognizable wiring, but controlled by the power management chip. Another comment frequently made is to put a switch on the antenna wire so you can disconnect the antenna and limit reception on the device at will. Well, as a ham operator, I can tell you that this will not work. Putting any kind of additional wiring in the antenna circuit changes the length of the antenna and changes the antenna resonance. The antenna length is pre-computed to be resonant to the frequencies it supports. And here's the fun part. A 5G phone has lots and lots of additional antennas. They're pretty short, but that is not like putting a switch to one cable. There are many, so this is definitely a no-go. One group of phones I did not discuss here are the Pinephone and Librem 5 phones that use an IOT baseband connected to the AP via USB. These phones limit the threat to the AP, but that would require a whole long discussion. They have their own security problems, though a different set. So let's summarize the significance of this whole detailed story. 1. The phone can be made safe from mass surveillance and data mining and big tech control by handling the privacy issue on the AP side, meaning the application operating system. At the moment, the only main option with the most consumer friendliness is to use a de-Googled Android like AOSP or a Brax OS. 2. This leaves the MP side open to attacks, though this is from an active hacking of individual devices. It is not a threat for the masses. Thus, the MP is more of a cybersecurity threat, and at the moment, I expect even more hacks to occur. The reason I gave was that aside from existing openings, the complexity of the architecture, the various channels of communications, the secret handshakes and protocols leave too many avenues for attack. There are different manufacturers who use different operating systems and different circuitry, which means there are several possibilities for mistakes. So the more complex the environment, the more chances of cyber attack threats. 3. The MP is tied to many state-level attacks. The attack using the SAT browser on the SIM card was initiated by some state player. We can guess who that is. Backdoors can be implemented either intentionally or by planted engineers. This kind of fault may never be discoverable. At the moment, the MP industry is operating under the security by obscurity rule rather than by any real standards to make everything secure. And that is because the bulk of the basebands in the USA, for example, is controlled by a single company, Qualcomm. 4. The way to mitigate an attack on the baseband modem for a standard phone is A. To remove the SIM card, and B. Use Wi-Fi instead. This removes traffic from the baseband and removes the way for the phone to be addressed by some external party. Obviously, this is a temporary solution when the phone calling and texting is not being used. 5. There's no easy alternative since the control of the production of SoCs are only within the power of the major silicon makers who mass produce these. They make 4 billion phone SoCs a year. So customizing specialty phones with the same feature set and capability of flagship models is not within the ability of any small company to do without significant compromises. Thus, for the moment, we still have a continued threat to us from hacks by anyone using normal smartphones with a standard baseband modem. These hacks could come from the state through known 0 days or backdoors. These hacks could also be new hacks based on discoveries by hackers. Several new attacks have been confirmed, and as I said, a file was placed on an attacked phone via a buffer overflow in the memory of the phone, initiated from the MP side. So while I state that we can have privacy from a de-Googled Android phone, unfortunately, no one can state that they can have security from hackers, since clearly many threats can come from the MP side and can cross over to the AP side. We will likely dissect parts of this video in the future, since this is a very big topic. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.